I found my wife's wedding ring in the freezer at 1:14 in the morning, sitting inside a bag of frozen peas like she had hidden it there in a panic and forgotten where she put it. 10 minutes earlier, she had kissed me on the cheek and told me she was exhausted from helping her sister move. But her sister had just posted a photo from Cancun with a margarita in her hand, and the caption, "Finally escaped." My name is Michael Turner, and until that night I thought my marriage was tired, not poisoned. I thought Laura and I were in one of those dull seasons people warn you about after 11 years together, where the conversations get shorter, the affection gets scheduled, and both people start mistaking silence for peace. She had been distant for months, always guarding her phone, laughing at messages she said were work nonsense, stepping outside to take calls because she didn't want to wake me, even though I was sitting right there in the kitchen, wide awake, watching the woman I loved slowly become someone who treated me like an inconvenience. When I asked about Cancun, she did not even blink. She looked at the photo, looked back at me and said, "That's old, Michael. You're embarrassing yourself." I wanted to believe her so badly that I almost did. Then her phone buzzed on the counter, face up for once, and the message said, "Did he ask about the ring yet?" She snatched it so fast her nail cracked against the screen. I just stared at her, and she laughed this ugly little laugh I had never heard before and said, "You're really doing this? You're spying on me now?" I said, "Who is that?" And she folded her arms like I had offended her. "Nobody, a friend." "You would know that if you weren't so insecure." Then she turned it around on me so smoothly it made my stomach twist. She said I had been cold, suspicious, hard to live with, that maybe she needed people who actually listened. I asked again, softer this time, "Why did they know about your ring?" Her face changed for half a second. Not guilt exactly, more like anger that I had cornered her before she was ready. Then she said the cruelest thing she could have said. Maybe I took it off because wearing it felt dishonest. I felt something inside me drop. Before I could answer, another message came through, and this time I saw the name before she hit it. Daniel. My best friend, Daniel, the man who stood beside me at our wedding, had texted my wife at 1:27 a.m. saying, "Don't tell him tonight, he's not ready for what we did." That message from Daniel stayed burned into my head as Laura slowly lowered her phone like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just watched my entire life rearrange itself in one sentence. I remember my voice coming out quieter than I expected, almost detached from me, asking, "What did you do?" And she didn't answer right away. She just stared at me with this cold, measured expression like she was deciding how much truth I could handle without making things inconvenient for her. Then she shook her head and actually smiled, not kindly, but like I was a child asking something stupid, and said, "You're twisting things. That message doesn't mean what you think it means." I felt my chest tighten because that was always her move. Take something clear and make me question my own eyes. And for a second, I almost let her do it again until I said, "He said, we, Laura. What did you and Daniel do?" And her jaw flexed just slightly before she rolled her eyes and muttered, "God, you're being dramatic." I stepped closer without even realizing it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And I said, "Call him, right now. Put him on speaker." She laughed again, softer this time, almost pitying, and said, "I'm not going to drag Daniel into your paranoia just because you're spiraling." That word spiraling hit me harder than anything else because suddenly I wasn't a husband asking a question. I was a problem she needed to manage. I told her, "You don't get to make me feel crazy for this." And that's when she snapped. Her whole tone changed, sharp and defensive, like I had crossed some invisible line. "Maybe if you hadn't checked out of this marriage months ago, I wouldn't need to talk to someone who actually understands me," she said. And I just stood there trying to process how this had somehow become my fault. She kept going, not even slowing down, telling me I was distant, that I stopped trying, that I made her feel invisible, and every word felt rehearsed, like she had been waiting for this moment to unload it all. I asked her one more time, "Did you sleep with him?" And for the first time, she didn't answer immediately. That pause was louder than anything she could have said. She looked away, grabbed her keys, and said, "I'm not doing this tonight," like walking out would somehow erase what I'd already seen. I followed her to the door, not touching her, just standing there as she slipped on her shoes like this was a normal argument, like she wasn't leaving me standing in the wreckage of something I didn't even know had been breaking. Right before she opened the door, I said, "If you walk out right now, you're choosing whatever this is over me." And she didn't even turn around when she answered. She just said, "No, Michael, I'm choosing myself," and walked out into the night like I was already a closed chapter. I stood there in the silence she left behind, staring at the empty doorway, and that's when my phone buzzed in my hand. It was Daniel calling me. Daniel's name lit up my screen while the front door was still swinging shut behind Laura, and I just stood there staring at it like if I didn't move, didn't answer, somehow this wouldn't become real. But it kept ringing, steady, patient, like he already knew I'd seen everything and was just waiting for me to catch up. I finally answered, and the first thing he said wasn't an apology, wasn't even my name. It was, "Hey, you need to calm down before we talk." That hit me like a slap. I actually laughed, but it came out wrong, hollow, and I said, "Calm down? You text my wife at 1 a.m. about what you two did, and I need to calm down." There was a pause on his end, just long enough to feel calculated, and then he sighed like I was exhausting him. "It's not what you think," he said, and I swear I felt something in me crack because that was her line too, word for word, like they had rehearsed this together. I asked him straight, "Did you sleep with her?" And he didn't answer, not immediately, and that silence felt louder than anything Laura had said before she walked out. Then he finally said, careful and controlled, "You're jumping to conclusions." And I could hear something in his voice I had never heard before. Not guilt, not fear, just this quiet confidence like he thought he could talk his way out of anything. I started pacing without realizing it, my hand gripping the phone so tight it hurt, and I said, "Don't do that. Don't talk to me like I'm stupid. I saw the message. I saw her face. Just tell me the truth." He exhaled slowly, like he was deciding how much to give me. And then he said, "Things between you and Laura haven't been good for a long time. You know that." Hearing him say her name like that, like he had a place in her life now, made my stomach turn. I snapped, "You don't get to talk about my marriage like you're part of it," and he cut in immediately, his tone sharpening for the first time. "Maybe I already am," he said, and the room just went silent around me, like everything had been sucked out of it. I stopped moving, stopped breathing for a second, and said, "What does that mean?" But deep down, I already knew. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "She feels alone, Michael. She's been feeling that way for a while." And I could hear the justification in every word, like he was building a case against me while standing on the ruins of my trust. I whispered, "So you stepped in?" And he didn't deny it. Not really. He just said, "Someone had to." That was the moment it stopped feeling like suspicion and started feeling like betrayal I could touch. I thought about all the nights he'd been at our house, sitting at our table, laughing with us, calling me his brother, and I said, "How long?" My voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. There was another pause, longer this time, heavier, and when he finally spoke, it was quieter, almost cautious. "You don't actually want the answer to that right now," he said. And that was the first time I realized this wasn't something recent. This wasn't a mistake, or a bad night, or a moment of weakness. This had been happening while I was still trusting both of them. I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my fingers went numb, as Daniel's words just sat there between us, heavy and unfinished. And I said, "No, you don't get to decide that for me." "How long?" My voice came out sharper this time, steadier, like something in me had shifted from shock into something colder, more focused. And he let out this quiet breath like he knew there was no way around it anymore. "Since January," he said. "January." I actually repeated it out loud, not because I didn't hear him, but because I needed to feel how real it was. And when I did, my mind immediately started filling in the blanks without asking my permission. January was when Laura told me she needed space to think. When she started going on those late-night drives, she said helped her clear her head. When she told me I was imagining things if I thought she was pulling away. January was when I confided in Daniel that I was scared of losing her, and he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're overthinking it, man. She loves you." I swallowed hard and asked, "So all those nights, when you told me you were busy, when you said you couldn't hang out, you were with her?" He didn't answer directly, just said, "It wasn't like that at first." And that made something inside me twist because it meant there was a beginning, a progression, something that grew while I stood still thinking everything was just stress and distance. I laughed again, but there was nothing left in it this time. Not like what? Not like betraying me? Not like lying to my face every day? And he got defensive. I could hear it creeping into his tone now, like I had finally pushed him into a corner. "You weren't exactly present, Michael," he said, sharper now. "She was miserable. You didn't see it, or you didn't care." That anger lit something in me, but it wasn't explosive. It was controlled, almost terrifying in how calm I felt when I said, "So you decided to fix my marriage by stepping into it?" And he didn't deny it. He just said, "I didn't plan for it to happen," which somehow made it worse, because it meant it had unfolded naturally to him, like crossing that line was just something that made sense. I asked him, "Does she love you?" And there was a pause, a real one this time. And when he answered, it was quiet. "She's confused," he said. Confused. That word echoed in my head because Laura had used it before, months ago, sitting across from me at dinner, saying she felt confused about where we were going. And I had reached across the table and told her we'd figure it out together. I thought we were fighting for us. I didn't realize I was the only one still in it. I said, "She left. She just walked out." And he went silent for a second before asking, "She's not with you?" That question hit me wrong, like he didn't expect it, like something about tonight hadn't gone according to whatever plan they had built behind my back. "No," I said slowly, my chest tightening again. "She's not." There was a shift in his voice then, subtle but unmistakable, and he said, "She told me she was going to talk to you, not leave." That's when the ground shifted again, because if she wasn't with me, and she wasn't supposed to leave, then where was she actually going? That question kept echoing in my head after the call ended, because Daniel hung up right after that, like he suddenly had somewhere to be, somewhere more important than finishing the conversation where he just admitted to destroying my life. I stood there in the same spot, staring at nothing, replaying his words over and over. "She told me she was going to talk to you, not leave," and something about it didn't sit right, like there was another layer I hadn't seen yet. I grabbed my keys without even thinking and walked out into the night, the air hitting my face sharp and cold. But it didn't clear anything. It just made everything feel more real. I sat in my car for a second, hands on the wheel, asking myself the question I didn't want to ask. If she wasn't coming home, and she wasn't supposed to go to him, then who was she really going to? I called her. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. Then I did something I hadn't done in years, something I always told myself I'd never do because it meant I had already lost trust completely. I opened our shared location app, and she had turned it off. That hit harder than anything else because Laura never turned it off, not once in all the years we had it, not even when we fought, not even when she said she needed space. The only reason to turn it off was because she didn't want to be found. I sat there for a few seconds trying to breathe through it, trying to tell myself there was some explanation that didn't make this worse, but my hands were already moving, scrolling through old messages, old photos, anything that could tell me when this actually started to change. And that's when I saw it. Something small, something I should have noticed months ago. A calendar entry. Every Thursday night, blocked out as late client meeting. I knew for a fact she didn't have standing meetings like that, not every week, not at night. And suddenly January made more sense in a way that made my stomach turn. I thought about all those Thursdays I stayed home, thinking she was working late, sometimes even texting Daniel to see if he wanted to grab a drink, and he'd always have some excuse, always busy, always another time. I whispered it out loud without meaning to. Thursdays. And it felt like I was finally seeing the shape of something that had been right in front of me the whole time. My phone buzzed again in my hand, and for a split second I thought it was her. That maybe she was finally going to explain, finally going to tell me something that made sense. But it wasn't Laura. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to, something in my gut that felt heavy and wrong. So I answered. A man's voice came through, calm, unfamiliar. And the first thing he said was, "You're Michael, right? Laura's husband?" My chest tightened instantly. "Who is this?" I asked, already feeling like I knew I wasn't going to like the answer. There was a pause, like he was choosing his words carefully, and then he said something that made everything inside me drop all over again. "She's here with me." I didn't even realize I had stopped breathing until my chest started hurting, and I said, "What do you mean she's with you?" But my voice sounded different now, thinner, like whatever control I had left was slipping through my fingers. The guy on the other end didn't rush, didn't stutter. He just said, calm as anything, "She asked me to call you if you tried reaching her, said it would be better coming from me." That sentence hit harder than anything Laura or Daniel had said, because it meant this wasn't chaos. This wasn't something that spiraled out of control tonight. This was planned. I swallowed and forced the words out. "Who are you?" And he let out a small breath like he expected that question. "My name's Aaron," he said. Just Aaron. No hesitation, no apology, nothing. I tightened my grip on the phone and asked, "Why is my wife with you, Aaron?" And there was a pause, just long enough to feel deliberate, before he answered, "Because she didn't feel safe coming home." Safe. That word snapped something in me. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "Don't you dare twist this into something it's not. She walked out on me. No one forced her." He didn't argue, didn't get defensive, just said quietly, "I'm not here to fight you, Michael. I'm just telling you what she told me." I started pacing again, faster now, my thoughts tripping over each other, trying to make sense of a man I had never heard of speaking about my wife like he had a place in her life. "Put her on the phone," I said, sharper now. "If she's there, put her on." There was movement on his end, muffled voices, and then I heard her. "Michael," she said, soft, careful, like she was talking to someone fragile. That tone made my stomach twist worse than any accusation. "Who is he?" I asked immediately, not even acknowledging anything else, and she hesitated, just for a second, before saying, "He's a friend." I actually laughed at that, a broken sound that didn't feel human. "Another one?" I said. "How many friends do you have, Laura?" Her voice tightened. "This isn't fair." And there it was again. That shift. That way she could take something undeniable and make it about fairness, about me being unreasonable. I said, "You turned off your location. You left in the middle of the night. You're with a man I've never heard of, and I'm the one being unfair." And she went quiet. Then she said something that made everything worse. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." I stopped moving completely. "Find out what?" I asked, my voice dropping again, because suddenly it felt like I was standing on the edge of something deeper, something I hadn't even seen yet. She didn't answer right away, and I could hear Aaron in the background, low, steady, like he was telling her something. Then she came back, her voice steadier now, almost rehearsed. "Michael, there's more you don't know, a lot more." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about Daniel. I had been looking in the wrong direction the entire time. The line went quiet after she said that, like even she understood she had just pulled the floor out from under me, and I felt this slow, sinking weight in my chest as I said, "Then start talking," because at that point the truth couldn't make things better, but the silence was making it worse. She exhaled, shaky but controlled, and said, "You think this is just about Daniel, like it started this year, like it's some mistake that got out of hand. And I didn't answer because that's exactly what I had been holding on to, that this was recent, that maybe there was still something left to salvage if I could just understand it. Then she said, "It didn't start with him." I closed my eyes for a second because I felt it before she even explained it. That deep, sick realization that whatever I thought was the worst version of this wasn't even close. "Then when?" I asked, barely above a whisper, and she hesitated again. But this time it wasn't uncertainty. It felt like calculation. "Do you remember when you started working those late projects 2 years ago?" she asked. 2 years. My mind jumped immediately. Late nights at the office, deadlines, me coming home exhausted while she was already in bed, telling me it was okay, that she understood, that she was proud of me. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it, and said, "Yes," and my throat felt tight. "That's when I started feeling alone," she said, softer now, almost like she was telling her side of the story instead of confessing to destroying mine. "That's when I met Aaron." I felt my grip tighten around the phone. "So him," I said slowly. "He's not new." She didn't answer directly, just said, "He listened to me when you didn't." And that sentence hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for, because part of me knew there was truth buried in it. But it didn't justify anything she had done. I forced myself to stay focused. "So what is he?" I asked. "Another friend? Another mistake?" And that's when her tone changed again, steadier, almost defensive in a different way. "No," she said quietly. "He's not a mistake." Those words landed heavier than anything else so far, and I felt something inside me finally start to give way. "Then what is he, Laura?" I asked, because I needed her to say it. I needed to hear how far this had gone. There was movement on her end, like she had stepped away from him, or maybe closer, I couldn't tell. And then she said it. "He's the one who knows everything about me now." I let out a slow breath, trying to process that, trying to understand how I went from being her husband to someone who didn't even know the full version of her life anymore. "Everything?" I repeated, and she didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." And that's when the thought hit me, sharp and immediate. And I asked the question I had been avoiding without even realizing it. "Does he know about Daniel?" There was a pause, a long one. And then she said something that made my entire body go cold. "Yes, because he was there the first time." I didn't understand what she meant at first, not fully, because my brain refused to connect it, refused to let those words land the way they were supposed to. So I said it back to her slowly, like maybe I heard it wrong. "He was there?" And my voice sounded distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside my body. She didn't rush to fix it. She didn't soften it. She just said, "Yes." And that single word felt heavier than everything else she had told me combined. I pressed my hand against my forehead, trying to steady myself, trying to piece together something that made sense, and I asked, "What does that even mean, Laura?" But I already felt it forming, something dark and impossible taking shape in the back of my mind. Her answer came quieter this time, like even she understood there was no clean way to say it. "It means, it didn't start the way you think. It wasn't just me and Daniel behind your back. Aaron knew. He was there when it crossed the line for the first time." My stomach dropped so hard I had to lean against the car door just to stay upright. "So the two of you..." I couldn't even finish the sentence, couldn't bring myself to say it out loud, and she filled in the silence for me in the worst possible way. "It wasn't planned," she said quickly, like that mattered now. "It just happened. We were all talking, drinking, and things got blurred." Blurred. That word felt like an insult, like reducing something this destructive into something vague made it easier to live with. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I could see it. Not clearly, but enough to understand what she was saying without her having to spell it out. The three of them, together, while I was somewhere else, trusting both of them without question. I whispered, "And you kept going," because that was the part that mattered now, not how it started, But what they chose after? There was a pause, and she didn't deny it. It became complicated, she said. I let out a breath that didn't feel like relief. Didn't feel like anything except something leaving me for good. Complicated, I repeated, and I almost laughed again. But nothing came out this time. You had an entire life happening behind my back, and you call it complicated. She tried to say my name again. Softer now, like she was reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Michael. But I cut her off. How many times? I asked. Because I needed to know how deep this went. How far back I had been standing in the dark while they lived something else in the open. She didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I looked up at the empty street in front of me. The same street I had driven down 1,000 times, thinking I was going home to something real. And I said, quieter than I expected, "You didn't just betray me. You rewrote everything I thought was real." She started crying then. I could hear it in her voice, but it didn't reach me the way it used to. All I could think about was every memory I had trusted, every moment I thought was ours, and how many of them overlapped with something I never even knew existed. And the worst part wasn't just that she had chosen them. It was that somewhere along the way, she had stopped choosing me entirely, and I was the last one to realize it.